Good morning.
Morning, everybody.
Hey,
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I'm a moment late here. Had a little trouble getting in.
good morning, Jonathan. Getting started.
Yeah, we are not close to quorum, so we'll give it a few more minutes. Okay, one more and we will hit quorum.
Hi, Jonathan. This is Renee Vaughn.
Welcome, Renee. Glad to
I'm glad to be here. I'm actually attending another meeting, so I will, hopefully it won't knock me off.
It is possible to do it. I've done it before.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. We'll let folks continue to trickle in. It is 10:03 a.m. and certainly, as always, want to respect everybody's time. So welcome to the March meeting of the Performance Management Subcommittee. I'm Jonathan Crooms, the current chair. Great to have you all here today, as always. We have a full agenda. We're actually probably going to be spending the bulk of our time talking about the results of the spring COC permanent housing scoring competition, as well as the updates from the data collection on the COC approved, HSAC approved performance measures. So we've got what's going to be hopefully some great discussion today. And we also will be welcoming two new members, one of whom is already with us. So we have Angela Holmes and Renee Vaughn, who are joining the committee. And since we have new members, what I would like to do is just go around and have everybody introduce themselves, just so that we can welcome our new members, as well as everybody get to know each other again. So again, I'm Jonathan Crooms. I'm the Performance Management Subcommittee Chair, and I'm a Veteran Service Officer with Durham County Government. And if you'd like to go next.
Good morning, everyone. Lloyd Schmeidler. I'm Continuum of Care staff, Senior Community Development Analyst in the City of Durham's Community Development Department.
And who would like to go next?
I'm Melva Henry. I am a community development analyst for the City of Durham's Community Development Department.
I'm Janine Gordon. I am the Assistant Director for Aging and Adult Services with the Department of Social Services.
I'm Shantae Addison. I'm the Director of Client Services for Housing for New Hope.
Hi, I'm Nicole Lamb. I'm from Coordinated Entry, the entry point of Durham County with VOA.
I'm Deja Shanks from NCCEH Project Specialist.
All right, and let's see, that leaves Renee and Melissa, I believe. So Renee, if you want to go.
I'm Renee Vaughn, and I'm the Durham County Faith Representative. I'm bivocational, a minister in the community and a research administrator at Duke University.
Good morning, I'm Tracy Sandino, Director of Housing Assistance Programs here at Alliance Health. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And Melissa and Ruby, are you all with us?
Hi everyone, my name is Melissa. I am the coordinator with the Homeless System.
Okay.
Ruby Holmes, the Homeless System Analyst with the Community Development Department.
Okay, terrific. Well, welcome again, and we'll go ahead and jump right in. The next item is the public comment period. As I mentioned in the previous two meetings, I've been trying to kind of bring our meeting a little bit more in line with the protocol of our larger HSAC meetings, which has a public comment period. And so wanted to ask if there are anybody would like to make a public comment at this time. Okay, well, we'll move right along. No public comment. We just did introductions and we've met Renee. It doesn't look like Angela Holmes is able to join us today, but many of you probably know her. Very involved with several of the COC projects and a previous chair of the committee. So hopefully she will be able to join us here soon, if not today. We do have last month's minutes up for adoption. I have sent those out. Does anybody have any changes or edits that need to be made? One thing that I do need, I could not remember from my notes who had made the motion to adjourn and who seconded it. So I don't know if anybody remembers that, but that I do need to put in there for the group.
Jonathan, I may have seconded, but I don't recall who first made the motion.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy. All right. We'll have to go back and take a look at that. If there are no edits that need to be made, I am happy to entertain a motion for adoption of the February minutes.
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes.
Okay. And do we have a second?
I'll second Jonathan.
Okay. And any further discussion or edits? Okay. And if no further discussion, if we would just vote in the chat box, members of the committee only. Okay, minutes are adopted. I just noticed we have a new person who's joined our group, Regina Mays. Regina, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, telling us who you are.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Regina Mays. I am, I guess, a community advocate and supporter in light of homelessness and trying to conquer that wild beast here in Durham. And I am also a Families Moving Forward board member.
Okay, wonderful. Great to have you. All right, moving right along. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the next item on here. This is just a standing call for a secretary of our subcommittee. I know everyone's busy. I'm just I keep it on the agenda because it's a standing call. So if anybody is interested in being our secretary, just email me or give me a call. All right, on to the next item. We are going to go ahead and review the spring COC permanent housing scoring competition results. And so we had a subcommittee of both Janine, myself, Lloyd, and Melissa, and we have compiled the results, and Lloyd has put together a very nice document here giving us some background on the results. And so would love to turn it over to you, Lloyd, to present to us.
Morning again. Thank you, Jonathan. I sent the summary document out to the committee earlier this morning. Regina may, others that are not formally members of the committee may not have it. I am sharing my screen. It's about just over 3 pages, I believe. So in the discussions, the introduction basically of this document briefly describes why we do it. We're mandated by the monitoring, evaluation, and ranking policy to do complete semi-annual evaluations of the performance of our COC funded permanent housing projects. When we met yesterday, Nina and Jonathan and Melissa, not yesterday, but we met on Tuesday to review the objective scoring. Recall, we did not include housing first component scoring in this year's evaluation because we have a separate process going on for that with the cross COC evaluation. The subcommittee and staff wanted to remind people reading this document as well as understanding the results, wanted to set some of the context. And so there's several notes here about the challenges we are facing in the current environment in Durham with affordable housing and with helping people experiencing homelessness get back into permanent housing. It's a particularly challenging time due to rapidly increasing rent prices, as well as finding landlords willing to rent to people moving out of homelessness is particularly difficult in these near pandemic and hopefully soon post-pandemic times, but we're still struggling with that. And then the component around serving people with high needs, we recognize that sometimes projects don't necessarily feel like they have much choice in who they admit into their projects, as that is largely done through the by name list referral processes that are part of our coordinated entry system and process, and yet we continue to monitor that just to confirm that our projects are serving high need populations. And generally, I think all of them are doing quite well in that area, and there's not clear distinctions in the scores between the high need populations being served by rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing project populations. The failure to expand Medicaid, we're hoping for an expansion perhaps this year, according to what we're hearing from the General Assembly, but that's not not yet completed. So that continues to make it difficult for projects to help people obtain health insurance coverage if they don't already have it. And then a continuing struggle has been to help participants increase maintain or increase employment and total income. The heart of the summary document is the table on page 2 that presents the overall scoring on the 4 components listed in columns 4, 5, 6, and 7 in the document. One thing to keep in mind is that the total points possible on the score sheet varies from 240 points for rapid rehousing projects, and that is because we also evaluate those projects on the length of time between project entry and housing move-in, and we don't measure that for permanent supportive housing projects. We may measure that in time to come, but we don't have a whole lot of data in the annual performance report that we use as the primary document that reports project performance. But we may measure that in the future at some point. I briefly looked at these rankings from the 2022 Continuum of Care competition, which you recall we completed last fall, and the rankings from first to I think at least 3, if not 4, are the same, in that Dash was also ranked first among their renewal projects last year, and we congratulate them on the outstanding performance. Streets to Home 2 and William Square were also in the second and third positions in terms of the rankings from last year. Certainly during the discussion, I'm willing to delve deeper into some of the scoring. You can see there's much of the total performance, or much of the total score is based on component 1, project performance. Number 1, project performance as a component is more than half of the total points possible on the scoring instrument. So while we do keep track of components 2, 3, and 4, cumulatively they are only 90 points, and they are less than half of the total points possible. But still, you can see that on some of the projects it varied quite a bit on how much different projects scored in those 3 components. And then finally, I'd mentioned that we debated at the staff level as well as with the committee as to how we should regard Home Again. Finally, we decided at least that we would present the scoring of Home Again, while realizing that the project is moving to close. The project was reallocated in 2022, and the COC funding has been reallocated to other projects, and so we anticipate the Housing Authority will be transitioning current participants in that project to a regular Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher later this year. But the primary challenge there is that the Housing Authority has been challenged to get HMIS data entry work completed in a timely way, I would say over the last 12 months or so. And so much of the data that we would rely on to compute these scores, particularly under project performance, are just not in the HMIS, and that's the primary reason that the project scored so low. You see, it did score well with project efficiency based on the data we have. It is it did in the last grant year completely expend its grant and is serving people, serving a good number of people, so that project efficiency is on par with what we'd like to see. That being said, then the next page 3 largely looks more closely at each of the 3 projects, or excuse me, each of the 9 projects that we evaluated, with some thoughts that I think are, in my mind, largely intended for the benefit of the projects themselves, particularly in looking at areas that they could hopefully consider improving. Some areas for improvement, the DASH, where DASH, even though it can be recognized for outstanding and exemplary performance last year, still it received an 11-point deduction for only spending 90%, 89% of the grant. So there's some opportunities there for even stronger performance. And going down the list, Streets to Home did well. Many of the projects did well with, again, serving high need of vulnerable populations. Improved grant, did improve grant spending, but project performance could be improved. Only 6 of 25 possible growth points were received. For those who might be new, the idea of growth points is the document talks about growth points and bonus points. Growth points compare performance from year to year, and so if projects met the standard in both calendar year 2021 and calendar year 2022, they would receive 5 growth points. If they did not meet the standard in 2021 and showed at least a minimum of 5% improvement, they could get a growth points for each 5% improvement, up to a maximum of 5 growth points as well. And then the bonus points, there were up to 20 bonus points available for both rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing projects under in the project performance category, and that would offset deductions in some of the other performance areas that were evaluated. So so that would be the distinction between growth and bonus points in general. Williams Square continued to perform reasonably well. It did improve project performance significantly, receiving 17 of a possible 25 growth points. Average occupancy, I don't know if Shantae or others from Housing for New Hope can explain the average occupancy. It might have been for a good reason that the occupancy was down, and maybe it'll be higher in the semi-annual evaluation later in the year. But that did result in a loss of 7 points on efficiency. Streets to Home 2, very close to Williams Square in percentage score. Areas for improvement would be around in the project performance area, again, just 3 of 25 growth points. And it did earn 15 of 20 possible bonus points, so that was something that helped the project significantly improve its overall project performance score. Andover only received 11 of 20 points. I think in general we consider Jonathan or Janine may want to chime in, consider generally HMIS implementation probably the easiest component to score well in. Basically, getting all of the universal data elements into the HMIS and doing so in a timely way. And so it's, you know, it's a small part of the overall score, but still is a component that the projects can rather easily, we think, get 20 of 20 points. So when that's not happening, it does negatively impact the overall score. Rapid rehousing scored well on the HMIS implementation, but the area for improvement is that for some reason, and it's, I think, unusual, Rapid Rehousing 1 did not report any data on the length of time it took for project participants to enter the project or be enrolled in it and then to move into housing. And there was only one client entry, and it was for a person that had not moved into housing, and they left the project before they moved in. So that really significantly reduced the score of Rapid Rehousing 1. Rapid Rehousing 3 had strong project performance. Project efficiency suffered with the average cost of exit to permanent housing being high. Fresh Start continues to serve chronically homeless people with a rapid rehousing focus. And again, for people who might be new to the committee, Fresh Start is a rapid rehousing project, and it typically targets chronically homeless people who would ordinarily not score high for referrals to permanent supportive housing. So it looks at chronically homeless people who could benefit from short to medium term rent assistance, and generally the costs for providing a rapid rehousing project to this target population is understandably somewhat higher than other typical rapid rehousing participants who would have fewer needs for ongoing support. Again, HMIS implementation from our perspective should be an easy area for the project to gain some additional points. We've already talked about home again, so I'm not going to mention that. Final thoughts, just keep in mind that the results or scores are not directly comparable to scoring on the 2022 evaluation tool because we made some changes to it, removing component 5 and also adding some bonus opportunities and making some changes under component 2 in terms of how we calculated serving high need populations. And then we continue to be concerned that the evaluation tool may be scoring permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing projects inequitably. We tried to get it to match, but and with perhaps some longer thoughts here about why the 3 rapid rehousing projects were at the bottom of the listing of the project when you look at them from highest scoring project to lowest scoring, not referencing without considering home again. So that's kind of an quick overview. Hopefully that made some sense, but certainly willing to entertain questions. Jonathan or Janine, Melissa as well, if you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share, feel free.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lloyd. I definitely have some thoughts and some more questions, but I would love to open it up first to see if other folks in attendance today may have some questions.
I was trying to ask a question. Thanks, Lloyd, for this overview of, where most of the projects that have been awarded funding are standing in terms of overall performance for last year going into this year for availability to apply for additional funding. We partnered with Home Again, the Durham Housing Authority project, and we did, I think, implement an actual plan for this year, as I think September will be the end of this project in particular. But I didn't know whether or not anyone from the city had reached out, or from the COC staff lead to the Housing Authority regarding the status of their project.
Yeah, great question, Tracy. Thanks. We appreciate the partnership that Alliance has had with Home Again and the Durham Housing Authority for implementing this project. We have reached out several times over the months, and particularly our manager, Colin Davis, has been working closely with Jason, who is the attorney and is involved with compliance at DHA, and recently joined the Homeless Services Advisory Committee, the HSAC and COC board. It has been difficult for DHA to get the data into the HMIS. And I think I may have noted in this document, certainly I noted to the committee, that the project also lost points for not getting its annual performance report to HUD for the grant year that ended September 30th of last year. They had until the end of December of 2022 to get that report uploaded into Sage, and the last time I checked, it still had not been uploaded. So they do have, and I think from my perspective, the main takeaway from Home Again in terms of the scoring here is simply a reflection that we don't have the data. It's not that the project is it may be performing well, but we simply don't have evaluation data to to support, and it's not a reflection necessarily of, certainly you wouldn't see it as any kind of reflection on Alliance's efforts to provide support to the people currently enrolled in the project.
Well, I didn't know whether or not there was just, because I know they've had quite a few staff transitions over the course of the years, which may have impacted some of the data being, or reporting being consistent, but didn't know whether or not they had reached out for any technical assistance or needed assistance with it, because they were the primary lead on the project. We just assisted them with connecting potential participants to services, and to if they were Medicaid eligible, to services and benefits. So I didn't know whether or not they had reached out for any type of technical assistance, given they've got a lot of new staff.
Yeah, we've been working with them to get new staff trained, to identify staff who can do the data entry for the Home Again project, as well as other HMIS reporting that needs to be completed by the Housing Authority. But certainly it has been a challenge with their staff turnover to identify people to do that and to get them trained with their HMIS at NCCEH. But we continue to work with them and hope that the reporting requirements will be able to be completed moving forward.
So I have a question. Of course, I was on, the scoring subcommittee, and I'm kind of wrestling with the big picture still here. Certainly, anytime we do one of these scoring reviews, it's a snapshot in time. And as I think about how this might look to the larger HSAC. I'm wondering if there's any kind of broader conclusions that we can draw about how well we are doing in terms of housing our homeless, our homeless residents. Are we getting better? Are we about the same? I realize that we're kind of in a little bit of a different situation this year where we don't have comparable scores, because we don't have the housing component, but, kind of on the big picture level, are there any, sweeping conclusions that we can draw?
Your question addressed to me, Jonathan, or someone else?
That would be addressed to you and anybody else. I mean, and anyone's welcome to, certainly we have significant representation here by COC projects. So, anybody can answer that, but, particularly in light of the data, I guess it would be directed to you as well, because it's, what else can we draw from the data here?
Yeah. Well, I think we have a rubric, the evaluation tool, that at least helps us distinguish, I think, between overall project performance, right? And Dash's consistent performance, at least going back to the second evaluation of 2022, and this evaluation suggests that it is possible for projects to score well, right? And so that's important, right, to be mindful of. Similarly, when you look at serving high need populations, I think I mentioned in my overview that the projects, all 9 of them really, are doing well in this area, which again is kind of confirmation that our referral process is referring people who do need additional support to get back into housing. From our point of view, the easiest points to get would be under HMIS participation, and we'd like to see all of our projects get 20s in that area, and that would benefit all of the projects and significantly increase the scoring of some of them that aren't getting 20. When you look at project performance, the score of Rapid Rehousing 3 of 123 of a possible 150 points suggests that even there's potential for rapid rehousing projects to improve performance. 123 points is, as a percentage of the total points possible, is nowhere close to what Dash was able to achieve. Dash was able to achieve the 128 of a possible 125 because of not only did it score well on each of the 5 kind of key questions that make up with growth and yearly performance make up 125 points, but they were able to get some additional bonus points that actually gave them over 100% of the 125 points possible. So, but the 123 points for Rapid Rehousing 3 suggests that it is possible to get a significant number of points under component 1 for rapid rehousing projects, and then where you can see some significant decreases for our rapid rehousing projects is around project efficiency. And certainly when you compare that average to the average of the the permanent supportive housing projects, under efficiency, we're not doing nearly as well with our rapid rehousing. And that's, you know, I tried to explain some of that in my comments in the final sections or final thoughts section of the paper. In fact, I'll scroll down to that if people have not had a chance to read it. Basically saying that, you know, the 3 rapid rehousing projects exited only 34 people to permanent housing destinations, according to the 3 APRs for the calendar year, compared to 65 people. So some of that may have been impacted by the context that we began with explaining, particularly the challenges of identifying landlords and increasing rents, people needing longer periods of assistance. I think we are aware that we have perhaps been putting some people that really need permanent supportive housing into rapid rehousing projects because we don't have enough permanent supportive housing. I think the coordinated entry system and processes are trying to bring a better balance into that. But, you know, I think fundamentally within our system, you know, we with the rubric as we have it, the good news is that except for Home Again, which again is just scored so low because of the lack of data entry, the other projects we're not looking as a COC lead agency, or at the subcommittee we didn't discuss asking any one project to complete a performance improvement plan. I think you know, we'll certainly be sharing the individual scores on each of the questions of the performance evaluation tool with the organizational leadership as well as the project leadership, so that they can perhaps pay attention to it. We'll share this document with them as well, and we can try to provide some guidance and support for the individual projects. But I think this evaluation, as I said in the introduction, is primarily intended to help us see how projects are doing at the beginning of the you know, for the previous calendar year, and then to guide consideration for potentially reallocating low performing projects. I don't think at this point there's any need to reallocate based on what we did in 2022 in reallocating the Home Again, and as well as the Durham Crisis Response Center Rapid Rehousing Project that has been struggling with implementation since it was first awarded COC funds in the 2018 competition. You know,
Lloyd, Regina has a question. I want to
Yes.
go ahead and have
Go
her
ahead,
ask
Regina.
her question. You've answered. I've got some bigger strokes here from painting,
Good.
you know, from your comments there. So thank you, and go ahead, Regina.
Well, it wasn't so much of a question. Thank you, Jonathan. It was more along a comment to your question. I would just speak from what I see on the ground, and the 2 most familiar agencies that I'm with is the Durham Housing Authority and Alliance. And I know a big part of the rapid rehousing issue is, yes, increase in rents, and different things of that nature, but also supportive services. And when it comes to the scoring of, is somebody ready to be housed? That assessment plays a huge role, and you don't want to send an individual or family back into another crisis mode because you're just trying to, get the hand clap of saying we got them rehoused. You want to make sure that they are being placed in a permanent housing situation that would allow them to thrive and keep moving forward. And not have a revolving door of homelessness. And so when it comes to even just what I've seen, the view of the assessment questions from different agencies doesn't really address the need. And some of these agencies are having a hard time to have partnerships. Definitely the employment is playing a huge role. If a person comes into homelessness and in 3 months they have 4 different case managers, because of turnover, that makes it very difficult because each case manager is trying to learn that person's situation, but also connect them. And if notes don't get passed along, or sometimes we just lose people in the system because of the high turnover, because they don't know who the next person there is, no soft handoff of who your new worker may be. So I think a lot of that plays a role, and I know a lot does have to do with COVID, but also the reality of when some people came into homelessness and there was chances to be housed, there was more COVID dollars available than it is what's about to be currently coming down the pipe, because we know a lot of those services that funding is no longer available. And so I think all of those things are things to be considered, and maybe not be so harsh on some of the scoring. I think they look pretty good with me just having what knowledge I do of some of the challenges in the community, and trying to even keep the morale up of people. I'm going to be honest, when I got people from the streets telling me, Miss Regina, I get more services if I kind of stay in this quota, but as soon as I get a job that's not going to pay me but bare minimum, I'm going to lose everything and I have nothing back to fall back on. That's a reality. That's our real harsh reality. It's not like they don't want to do better or have better, but they also have to deal with the real fact of, what would I lose if I'm trying to gain something? And I don't think we're having enough of those conversations with supports in place to help them thrive if they become in permanent housing again.
Thank you for your comments, Regina. Tracy's got a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, I think you alluded to this in your overview, Lloyd, about the housing market. Is the housing market, the current market within Durham, impacting some of the individuals? Kind of dovetailing a little bit of what Regina was insinuating, is the housing market, individuals who are transitioning, and we know there's a limited number of either tax credit LIHTC projects or targeted housing units, or even housing units that fall a little below the fair market rate. Is that having a significant impact in individuals transitioning into a sustainable housing situation? And given, even though they overall, unemployment is low, but we also have to take in consideration the population we serve often have other barriers to sustain their employment, whether that's, having benefits, not having benefits, having a GED or high school education, and just knowing how to navigate through a new workforce model, which a lot of things are done online, if not in person. And so I'm just wondering if those are some of the challenges that could also be some of the underlying things that are impacting individuals, not only from entering into or transitioning into stable housing, but also being able to sustain those housing units once they transition from homelessness.
I think indeed those challenges are impacting the success of our projects and our efforts. So I think they are all of a piece.
Yeah, I would have to agree that it's a combination of things. It's not just one thing. It's not just housing. It's a lot of the level of vulnerability of the clients that we're serving. And I know for Rapid Rehousing 1 and 3 at Housing for New Hope, those are our smallest projects. We serve the fewest number of clients in those projects. So if we have one super vulnerable person who isn't quite as successful as the others, it kind of tanks our whole project. And to be fair, that's kind of what we've been given with coordinated entry. We get a lot of clients who aren't necessarily rapid rehousing clients. They're more along the lines and have the needs of a PSH client, but that's who we're serving because that's the need of the community, right? So you have these co-occurring disorders, you have substance use paired with mental health, and we're serving those people, trying to get them to attain employment within a short period of time, and that's not necessarily what's working. So I am grateful that we're trying to balance the system, so hopefully that these numbers will improve for the next grant cycle.
Yeah, thank you to both Shantae and Tracy for your comments as well. That really, I think that helps me certainly have a little bit more of a context here. Any other questions or thoughts on the scores?
I had a quick question. The Fresh Start program by Urban Ministry, is it Urban Ministries?
Yes.
How long has that project been around? Has it been around for a while now?
It has been around probably a half dozen years or more.
What did you say, Louise?
I think about a half dozen years.
Oh, okay.
And it's making a significant difference, I think, in the number of chronically homeless people that it is housing and moving back into the permanent housing. I think one of the but it does take longer for that project to get people off of the project and through the project than other projects.
Reason I was asking, because I thought a couple of years ago we discussed, what was the threshold for Durham, not necessarily what HUD had said, but was 70 or 75% is the threshold
Well,
for
according to the monitoring, evaluation, and ranking policy, the threshold was initially set at 65%, and the policy itself says that we should have the HSAC approve a percentage level for the following year in December before we actually start the next evaluation process. I don't think we got that done, did we, Jonathan, in December of 2022? So without that being done, I think we're content to leave it at 65%. And I think certainly we can realize that the scoring percentages that are given here are impacted and improved because we included opportunities for as many as 20 bonus points as well. So without those bonus points, some of the scores would be lower, and potentially one or the other of them might be under 65. I've not done that computation. So I mean, we're not recommending any performance improvement plan for any of the lower performing projects. we are recommending that we recognize Dash for its outstanding and exemplary performance in 2022.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I was just as I'm looking over the total scoring, I was thinking the only project really that was below what I thought the threshold was really it's Home Again, but Home Again is going to be discontinued. So really majority, all of the projects, if it's 65%, are meeting the threshold of performance that was set by each side.
Right. You know, and to say a further word about Fresh Start, their 2022 APR shows that they exited 22 participants, and of that number, 16 of them exited to positive housing destinations. 3 people were, two people died while they were project participants, so that doesn't impact their overall percentage in terms of exits to permanent housing, and 1 other person went to a hospital. So their overall percentage of exits to positive housing destinations was at 84%, which is, you know, a good percentage. They did have ended the year with 16 current participants. I think the project only is funded for like 12 units, so they are doing well on that level. And if they can continue to, you know, exit, I'd say, you know, 12 to 18 people a year. Yeah, I mean, their grant award is like $220,000 right now. So I think they're having a significant difference for some chronically homeless people, and we continue to have a large number of people in Durham that have been homeless for extended periods of time, and that's part of the challenge as well, with needing more permanent supportive housing for a lot of those individuals. And hopefully we can make more progress on that as some of the affordable housing bonds is used, as well as the home ARP funds, I think, are being recommended for potentially for the development of additional permanent supportive housing. And the department also is planning to allocate $300,000 of CDBG, Community Development Block Grant funds, that can be used for public services. Plan to use those to provide some additional supportive services funding for case management in either emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, or permanent supportive housing projects. We realize that particularly some of our COC funded permanent supportive housing projects do not have much money in their HUD budget for supportive services, and that may also be a challenge for some of these projects to find supportive service funding. So that'll be for contracts with the city in calendar years 2024 through 2026.
Okay, thank you all for your thoughts and your discussion. Thank you again, Lloyd, for preparing that memo and for the presentation. I need to go ahead and bring this item to a close so that we can ensure we have enough time for Melissa's presentation. She's going to provide us an update on where we're at with the data collection on the performance HSAC approved performance measures. So Melissa, I turn it over to you when you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm just gonna take a second to share my screen. Okay. So in March of 2022, the Homeless Services Advisory Committee adopted performance measures and benchmarks for the following project types. So we have street outreach, emergency shelter for those serving families, and then also emergency shelter projects serving adults without children. We also have transitional housing projects, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing projects, all that we're going to be monitored through this project performance reporting. all of these projects are asked to submit data through HMIS or a comparable database. So we provided a document that listed the benchmarks and the specific measures for each of the project types. And we asked that the providers submit their data using a Smartsheet dashboard system that I created, and I sent a training link out with specifics about how to use the Smartsheet, and then I continued to work with different providers to help them submit their data. We had a total of 12 providers who were asked to submit their data through the Smartsheet database. Almost all of them did provide their data. We did have several that did not submit data, so I wanted to make sure that I made the Performance Management Committee aware of that so that we could have a discussion about how to go about reaching out to those providers. Those that are starred, so CASA, DHA, USA Veterans Help, and Volunteers of America, and Triangle Residential Options for Substance Abusers in Durham, are the providers we did not receive data from for their projects. So we will have to work on getting that additional data. But in the interim, I'll be going over the Smartsheet reports to show you where we ended up so far and include some averages for the different project types as well. Okay. So this is the dashboard that we created for all of our projects. I shared this dashboard with our providers and asked them to use these form links on the bottom right side to submit their data. For the first one here, I have emergency shelter projects with adults without children. Overall, we had 32% average for all of our emergency shelter projects for in terms of the first measure, which has to do with positive housing destination. So 32% is actually below our threshold. Our benchmark, I believe, is 40% for this measure. Let me double check. Mm-hmm. 35%, I'm sorry, 35% is the benchmark for exits to positive housing destination. So we did have several projects that met the benchmark. So Urban Ministries had one of their projects. Project Access of Durham had two that met the threshold as well. And they also had another one that performed slightly higher than the benchmark. I do want to highlight that Project Access did have one of their projects that had 100% of their participants exit to positive housing destinations. For the second measure, which has to do with the length of stay in days, overall, our projects performed just below, just at the benchmark, so they met at 59%. The average length of stay is at 60, so they should have been at 60% to meet the benchmark, and they're just below that. We did have several projects that did meet the threshold, so that includes Open Table Ministry. One of their projects did Project Access as well, but overall we can see that most of the projects were barely meeting the threshold, and we had several that were much above the length of stay that we had set in the benchmarks. For measure 3, for these projects, this has to do with the income that the clients had, whether it increased or maintained their income. Only 50% is what we have. So total of our clients that were in emergency shelter projects without children, only 50% of those clients actually maintained or increased their income. So we were below the benchmark for that as well. Now, to be fair, I did ask providers to submit comments. There were some comments that had to do with COVID isolation that could have affected things like income or length of stay. If people, I believe there was a provider said if there was someone with COVID, they didn't want to exit them out of a project before they were able to maintain some kind of housing while sick. So there were some things like that in the comments that relate to some of those things and that also had to do with income. But overall, I did want to be able to provide those overall numbers for each of the measures. The next section is for street outreach projects. Our street outreach projects for the measure 1, which had to do with the contacts who engage with the project, we had about a 51% of the contacts were engaged with the project on a regular basis based on the data. This is below what our threshold is for street outreach. So we have a 60% threshold for contacts and we are only at 51%. So our average is below what it should be. A big part of this has to do with one of these open table ministry projects. However, the data, it looks like there's some data missing there. So it may just be that we need to update our HMIS records in that section because there was no data provided for the contacts who engage with that street outreach project. So that did significantly lower the performance of that specific measure because overall the rest of the projects were either meeting or exceeding the threshold for that benchmark. The only other exception to that would be one of the Housing for New Hope projects that was underperforming at 31% for contacts. For positive housing destinations for street outreach projects as well, we had a 48% average for positive housing destinations. And again, that's below average. So our threshold is 50%. So we're just below that at 48. We had 2 of our Housing for New Hope projects that were at the 30 to 35%. And that's what brought down the entire average for all of the positive housing destinations. For measure 3, this has to do with total income increase or maintained again. Our average is at 32%. Again, there was no data provided from 2 of the open table ministry projects, which is what led that to be at a 0% for both of those projects. And that did drag down the overall scoring. Not including that project, this average would have actually been at 53%. I do believe that there's some data that we'll have to get input into the system to make sure that we can get these things updated and accurate with where we currently stand. And then for measure 4, which is for health insurance coverage of the clients within the project, we have a 35% average, which again, this is below our benchmark of 40%. So we're just below that. One of the open table ministry projects, they did not have any data to show for clients that did have health insurance coverage out of 10 clients who were enrolled in the project at the time, which is what led to them having 0%, and it did bring down the overall average for that measure. And then we also, their other project for open table ministry is only showing 8 clients of 29 that had some kind of health insurance coverage. So that gave them a 28%. So these are 2 scores that I would find concerning unless there's data that's not being input into HMIS. I did want to point those out as well. For emergency shelter projects for 4 families, let's see, starting with the exits to positive housing destinations, we had an average of 44%. The benchmark for that is supposed to be 65%. So we are well below that benchmark. And majority of the projects were below. The only project that scored above the threshold was Family Moving Forward. One of their projects for emergency shelter for families was at 74%. So I do want to give that highlight that they did exceed the benchmark. But all of our other projects, we have a significant amount of work to do with one of our open table ministry projects. But there's also all of our other projects are below in that area. So we'll want to talk more about that. For average length of stays, we had 89 as the average length. which is actually right below what we want, which is good. So we wanted 90 days or less. So we are just at that benchmark. We've had two projects, one Open Table Ministry project and one Durham Crisis Response Center, that were below the benchmark in a good way, or met the threshold. So they were at 11 days for the Open Table Ministry project and average length of stay of 30 days for the Durham Crisis Response Center. So these are very good numbers in terms of the average length of stay of the clients in those projects. We have three other projects that did meet the benchmark, but we had two that were well above that 90-day mark, one of the Urban Ministries projects, and then one of the Families Moving Forward projects as well was well over that threshold. For measure 3, total income increased or maintained for emergency shelter projects for families, we had an average of 55%. This is below our 60% that we want to see for income maintained or increased here. So we have 3 projects that did not meet the threshold, which again is going to be one of those Open Table Ministry projects. The Durham Crisis Response Center, while they did great with average length of stay, we do see that the income was below the threshold in terms of how many clients they had to serve. They did say that there was some data that they just didn't have. Durham Crisis Response Center uses a different process for using their data. They don't use HMIS. So there are some data elements that they don't collect because it's not the same system as HMIS. So I do want to just point that out. Like if there are some differences or discrepancies in terms of their performance, it could just have to do with how they collect and maintain their data. So that's something that we might have to look into going forward if we score things differently or what have you. But overall, for that threshold, I mean, basically 3 of the 7 projects that we did get data from were able to meet were not able to meet the threshold for the benchmark. For rapid rehousing projects, for exits to positive housing destinations, we did very well. For rapid rehousing, we were at 89%, and the benchmark is actually 80. So overall, in terms of our average for all of our projects that submitted their data, they did really well. We only had 2 projects that did not meet the benchmark of 80%, and that was 2 of the Housing for New Hope projects. They did have 2 others that performed fairly well, though, in exits to permanent housing projects, permanent housing destinations. For measure 2, for total income increased or maintained, we did score below that. We were supposed to be at an 80%, and we were only at 67 with the average there. And that's because about half of the projects did not meet the threshold for income maintained or increased. However, there were some highlights. Urban Ministries did have one project that had 100% maintained or increased their income during the project, and they had 2 projects that scored that way, actually. Housing for New Hope also had a project that had all 3 of their clients maintain or increase their income in the time that they were enrolled in the project. For measure 3, this is length of participation before move-in. So we actually did meet the threshold, which was for average length of stay supposed to be 60 days or less. We were at 51 average. We do have a couple of things here to note, though. About half of these projects did exceed that length of stay amount. So that would be a negative in that case. We did have 4 projects that did meet the threshold or below the threshold. I grayed out these 2 because we've had a conversation that there might be some data missing here for length of stay for these 2 projects. And let me see. And then for health insurance coverage, we're at a 62%, which actually we're supposed to be at 75%. So we're just slightly below what that threshold should be for health insurance coverage. We had 2 projects that performed really, really well in terms of how many clients they had with insurance coverage. But the vast majority of these projects it hit the benchmark and exceed what the benchmark was supposed to accomplish. So we do have 2 projects out of these that did not meet the benchmark of the 75%. The last project type that we recorded data for was for permanent supportive housing projects. For this, for permanent housing stability, the overall average that we had was a 92%. For permanent supportive housing projects, this was supposed to actually be a 95% threshold. So we only had 3 of these projects that did not hit the 95, but I will say they were just below that benchmark. And then we had 2 projects that were at 100%, both of them by Housing for New Hope, and then with 2 others that met the benchmark. For measure 2, which is total income increased or maintained, this is where the permanent supportive housing project struggled a little bit. So we were at a 65% for this section, and we needed to be at 75% or higher. Only 2 of our projects met the benchmark, while the rest were below. So that brought the overall average for this measure at 65% for all of our permanent supportive housing projects. For measure 3, which has to do with employment income, only 1 of our projects met the benchmark, which is supposed to be 20%. So this is employment income that was earned, and that was Alliance Health. All of the other projects did not meet the benchmark for this. So this did bring our overall average to 12%. For measure 4, this has to do with mainstream benefits. We have only 2 of our projects that were meeting the thresholds, and the rest were below. So we were supposed to be at a 60% benchmark for this measure. So our average did meet it at 64%, but 3 out of the 5 projects did not meet the benchmark. But because 2 projects performed so highly, it did bring our overall average to 64%. For health insurance coverage, that is an area where our permanent supportive housing projects did really, really well in. So we had an 81% average. The benchmark was 60, so we were well above that. There was only 1 project that did not have any data in the HMIS for health insurance coverage, and that is one of our Housing for New Hope projects. So again, I think this is just something that we will have to update, just because there isn't any data in HMIS just yet for these projects. The biggest thing is that a lot of these projects are actually currently still active. So there are some data issues when it comes to having to make sure that things have been updated and added to the HMIS in a timely manner. So that's something that we'll definitely want to discuss as a performance management committee moving forward. But overall, this is just what we have so far. There are definitely a lot of updates that need to be made in HMIS so that we can accurately report some of these data points. And then we also just have to work with some of our providers who didn't submit any data. So this is a picture based on who we did get data from, but there's a lot of data that we still need from the other projects to get a full picture of where we stand as a COC with these projects.
Thank you so much for your hard work on this, Melissa. I know we only have, or our time is starting to run short, but perhaps we can fit in a few questions here. And if there are more discussions that we want to have about this, so we can also bring it up for further discussion at our next meeting, potentially. What questions or reaction? Oh, Tracy, there we go. We have our first question. Go ahead, Tracy.
Can you hear me? Okay. 2 questions. Thanks, Melissa, for this snapshot of the overall performance of the various CSC funded projects. I was just curious, does Open Table Ministry, do they have access to HMIS, and are they entering data into HMIS on a consistent manner? And then also, what is considered mainstream benefit?
Thank you for those questions. I am going to defer to Lloyd for a lot of these things in terms of when it comes to just like what some of these data points, because he has much better knowledge of our HMIS system and how the data is named and all of the naming conventions and everything. But in terms of like access to HMIS, all of the COC APRs is what we use for this. So all of the projects that are on here, with the exception of Durham Crisis Response Center, should have access to HMIS or have a person who has access to HMIS to submit their data and send updates. The only one of our projects that reached out to me and let me know that they have a different system for reporting their data was the Durham Crisis Response Center. So I worked with them personally to try to help them get their data added here with a different convention other than what we had given them in the benchmarks document that we shared earlier.
Yeah, I wish Drew, unfortunately, Drew couldn't be here today, so I'm sure he would probably be able to answer that, but go ahead, Lloyd.
Let me chime in on the question of non-cash benefit sources. The APR lists, four specifically, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, effectively known as WIC, and then TANF Child Care Services and TANF Transportation Services. There's two other categories as well. One is simply listed as other TANF funded services, and then lastly, a catch-all called other source. So those would be the types of non-cash benefit sources that are measured or can be recorded in the HMIS, and then there's where we come out with the non-cash benefit sources is another table that simply breaks it down into whether people had no sources of non-cash benefits or one or more sources of non-cash benefits. Does that address your question, Tracy?
Yeah, so mainstream benefits, are those the ones that you just cited are considered
Yes.
mainstream benefits? Okay, because I think I was thinking something else versus because majority of the population I know we serve are, because of their disability, are on some of those public service assistance programs, but majority receive Medicaid, and I didn't know if mainstream benefits was synonymous to something outside of Medicaid.
Yeah, Medicaid is considered a health insurance benefit, at least within the HMIS categorization. So it's listed under type of health insurance and is recorded as one source of health insurance if people have it.
Okay. So we are coming close up on time here. Would it be helpful, committee, if we had we picked up with this item with Melissa during our next meeting? If there's any more questions, it sounds like you'll probably have more data then too.
Realize we're close to time, Jonathan. I think the big question that Melissa raised kind of at the beginning of her presentation would be what we can do as a committee to get the 5 organizations that haven't yet provided data to begin doing so. And that is a concern for us
at this point. They've been notified on 5 different occasions after the initial notice. So I think that's what the concern is at the moment, because they've been notified. We've sent updates and reminders, and we just haven't gotten data. So that's why it's important for us to bring it to performance management to get your feedback about what potential next steps.
Okay. and I'm just thinking through, I mean, what are our options at this point? I mean, certainly the first thing that comes to mind is a letter from us as the committee with my signature as chair. Is there any other tools at our disposal that we can encourage folks to submit their data? Or perhaps we need some time to think on it.
Is this supposed to be like a snapshot at like an advocate database of all the things that are happening across the CSU? Or is this just for our committee?
So, oh, go ahead, Melissa. Did you want to answer that?
I was gonna say, I think the goal was that we were hoping we could get this data for all of our projects, because the ultimate goal is to be able to share this publicly, because we should be sharing our data publicly in terms of how our projects are performing. And so the goal was to get all of our projects to submit this data. Performance management would be able to review it if they needed to make any recommendations for providers, if they, for improving some of these measures where they may have been underperforming, but then also for us to be able to publicly share this data for people who wanted to review how our projects are performing as a system.
And I would add to that, outside of the funding cycles, I mean, we have projects who don't get funding through any of our funding cycles. And so this was also to look at the big picture, look at everybody. So we're, as performance management, we are to monitor the performance of the entire COC, and including those that, that don't participate in the funding processes. So through this data collection, we can look and see at the whole performance without it being tied to a funding cycle.
Okay, that was kind of the reason why I was asking, because if it's incomplete and we'd like to have a clearer picture overall, then maybe we should continue to, wait to see if we receive that additional data from those organizations and possibly move this to the next meeting to see whether or not we have all the different data collected from the various agencies that are missing. So we do have more of a comprehensive view on the macro level of what this looks like.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see this is obviously the first collection. And I think anytime you do something for the first time, I think a little extra grace is helpful. So I'd love to have an update from you come April, kind of where we're at with it. And then we can talk. I mean, I know you all have gone out of your way, and I know organizations are busy, but then perhaps, we can look at some other ways to encourage folks to submit their data.
I think according to our schedule, projects will begin submitting data for the October 1 through March 31st 6-month period in the latter part of April and into May. So I think our focus can be not so much getting these 5 organizations to submit data for the 6 months that ended September 30th, but getting data submitted for the reporting period that ends March 31st.
Okay. So we are very close to at time. Is there any way, Lloyd, to do a brief 1-minute update on the COC evaluation? I think it was more going to be an announcement of the 21st, our wrap-up session, correct? If it's not, we can.
We'll invite the entire committee to the March 21st wrap up all the Housing First COC evaluation process. In fact, yesterday we met with our TA provider, and we'll be inviting COC leadership, so the entire HSAC, if it wishes, at least to attend and serve as an observer. The session is primarily intended to get feedback from the projects and project participants and the evaluation teams who were involved. And so that's scheduled for March 21st from 9:30 to 11 a.m. And everybody on this committee certainly is welcome to participate. If you served on an evaluation team, certainly we strongly encourage you to participate. If you were not on an evaluation team or did not have a project evaluated, you're welcome to come and observe and listen to the input that we receive from those who were involved in the process.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'm realizing we're now at time, and out of respect for everybody else's time and other commitments, I'm happy to take a motion to adjourn, followed by a second, and we'll call it for today's meeting.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, second from Shante. Thank you to everybody, and
Well,
we'll see you at the HSAC meeting. We'll also see you at the 21st at the feedback session.
thank you.
Bye, everyone.
All right, thank you.